Good morning, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and welcome to another Bookish Breakfast. It's another pre-work Bookish Breakfast, so I'm going to try and be relatively brisk, but I do have quite a few books to mention this week, unlike the last couple of weeks. So unfortunately I haven't been able to go to work for a couple of days, so I've had a lot of days off, weirdly, in a time like this. So I have ended up reading a lot more than I otherwise would have done, although surprisingly maybe not as much as I would have done another time. So the principal thing that I've been reading is more articles about, sort of scientific based articles about coronavirus. I was thinking of linking one below actually about a qualitative study of the experiences of nurses brought in to respond to coronavirus in Wuhan in China, which is particularly interesting for me because I actually did my dissertation a long time ago on qualitative studies of the experiences of nurses moved into disaster zones or going to disaster zones to respond to crises, and it was pretty interesting to me to see this new paper in that kind of area, and see that the themes that they drew out of their interviews were very similar to the themes that I identified in the literature review that I had to do. So it's interesting that there was some kind of like continuity there in terms of the way that that people feel when they're pushed into that kind of situation. Yeah, and it's interesting as well because when I was doing that study, I was looking kind of speculatively, I suppose, and thinking, you know, like how would I feel if this happened? And now I'm reading these papers and thinking, oh yeah, that's familiar. So yeah, so things have changed basically. But yeah, it was an interesting study. So I'll see if I can get the link to that. I might not put it in right now because I need to go to work after I've talked about this pile of books. But if you looked another day, I'll hopefully link it below. So the main book that I've been reading is still The Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. I'm not going to talk too long about how much I love this book, but I really do. So I have moved on. The war is now over, and she is talking about her experiences in Oxford after the war, at a point where women had been allowed to be awarded degrees for the first time. So it's a really pivotal moment in terms of the history of women's empowerment and access to education, and it's interesting the way that she writes about the reactions to that from some of the male students and dons compared to the widespread public acceptance that now was the time to do this kind of thing, and how it fitted in with other laws and changes both in Britain and around the world. The other thing that she is very honest about in this period of her life is that although she is living a superficially quite happy life, as in she's got friends, she's doing something that she's always wanted to do, she does talk quite clearly about the impact that having lived through the war continues to have on her, at a time when the understanding of those things was really only just beginning to emerge because of all of these young men who suddenly were coming back from the fighting with a variety of mental impact. So she talks about having sort of hallucinations and insomnia and quite unstable emotions at times, and I just appreciated how honest she was with that. I think it's something that people still struggle to be open about. So yeah, I found that interesting. One thing that I found throughout this book is that Vera Brittain and her contemporaries massively benefited from the very Edwardian education that she quite often talks quite scathingly about, in terms of its restrictiveness and the segregation and various aspects of it. But the thing that she benefited from was this huge attention to the classics and works of poetry and so on, such that almost every time when she experiences a grief or a lonely moment, she has a quote from somewhere. And obviously she wrote this in 1933, so some of the quotes could have been retrospectively added in, but some of them she copied from her letters at the time. So some of them she knew at the time and used as emotional support, like initially. And I really think that she benefited a lot from this kind of classical education that we just don't have anymore. in terms of it offering her that kind of emotional scope and emotional support, as well as the impact that it had on her knowledge and understanding of literature, which is clearly very comprehensive. So that made me feel quite hopelessly inadequate, really, because I don't really have any appreciable knowledge of the classics. I definitely don't speak Greek or Latin, and I mean, I've always been of the belief that I'm quite pragmatic. I think it's more useful to speak French than it is to speak ancient Greek, or, you know, it's more useful to speak Italian than Latin. I don't know why I said French and Greek, but you get the point. Like, a modern language is a more worthwhile use of your language learning capacity and time. But at the same time, I really envy her, her understanding of the classical world and the way that it seemed to offer her a space of refuge within her mind, or a resource on which she was able to draw repeatedly. So while I was not at work, I decided to try and you know, go back to pushing my mind a little bit in terms of different kinds of reading. The other thing that she talks about that offended me slightly was, she said that people who stayed as nurses after the war were lacking imagination and other ambitions. Yeah, I was slightly offended, but nursing in those days was a very, very different excuse me, very, very different profession. And I think actually if she were to see what nursing is like today, she might think quite differently, because there's a lot of things that she kind of argues against here, such as like the very strict uniforms, the constant menial bedpan scrubbing work, and the ridiculous hierarchy that have, you know, significantly changed today. And I'm not saying that there aren't still aspects of silliness in the uniforms at times, and I'm not saying that nobody ever makes you scrub a commode, and definitely there is still a hierarchy that exists, but it's nothing like as bad as it was for the VADs during the war. So yeah, that's something that has changed for the better over the years. But yeah, she did upset me by saying that you know, nurses lack imagination. So I thought, you know, maybe I should branch out into the classics, expand my imagination, and expand my understanding of kind of literary themes. So I decided to start a little reading project for myself, where I'm doing a little bit of time reading a non-fiction book about literary ideas, and a little bit of time reading a classic, a work of like classical literature that I haven't read so far. So my non-fiction book is 50 Literature Ideas You Really Need to Know by John Sutherland. As you can see, it's not exactly a dense, complex, heavy literary book, but it is like an introduction to certain ideas of literary analysis or literary thinking that maybe I wasn't familiar with. I've tried to read this previously. I think it was a Christmas present that my mum got, and she kind of I remember being quite scathing about it, and just generally not thinking that it was worth the time to read, but just saying what I remember. But yeah, I thought if I can read like one idea or two ideas or three ideas even every day, then I might end up with a better understanding of some tools that people use to pick apart literature. And one that I have read so far that I think is quite relevant to BookTube, I think it's something that we do quite a lot, was number 6, The Effective Fallacy. And the effective fallacy is the idea that the thing that is important about a book is how it makes us feel and how we respond to it emotionally, and the idea that we like it, which is definitely something that I do a lot, and I think in BookTube as a whole we do that quite a bit, and I don't think it's a complete fallacy. I think it is important that a book should be able to move us, if that's what it sets out to do, but it's also about thinking about how it moves us, what techniques does it use to do that, and just generally trying to go a little bit deeper than the simple question of, yeah, I like it. So yeah, that's something that I'm going to try and push myself to do a little bit more, having heard about that. And then for my classic work of literature, I have decided to read the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, which I have never read before, although a lot of the stories are kind of vaguely familiar. I've just never read the full contextualised version. So this edition was translated by Evie Rieu, R-I-E-U, with a revised translation by somebody else of the same name, and it was introduced by Peter Jones, but I haven't read the introduction as yet. And yeah, it's really beautiful already, and I know some of that is down to the translator, but obviously it's a work that's got a reputation for being a classic for a reason, and it's a work that has been viewed throughout the ages as being, you know, beautiful and moving and interesting. I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot more than the Iliad, which I have never managed to fully read. But just on the subject of how classics offered some kind of emotional support and emotional a vehicle for understanding your emotions, or a vehicle for expressing your emotions. I'm quite near the beginning here, and I just particularly loved this sentence. Telemachus is talking about his father Odysseus not having returned from the Trojan Wars. I'm assuming you're all better educated than me and you know who those people are, but if not, Telemachus is the son of Odysseus, and he is at Odysseus's home, a place that I've forgotten what it's called already. Ithaca? Ithaca? Yeah, hopefully. And he says, he has gone where he cannot be seen or found, and to me has left nothing but sorrow and tears. Which I thought was a very moving sentence. Yeah, so I am enjoying this very much. That's the effective fallacy again, isn't it? I should have talked about why that is moving. But I don't really have time. If you've got any thoughts as to why that sentence is so moving, please share them in the comments. But the thing with the classics, the thing that makes them so hard to understand as a layperson just dipping into them, is that it's not just a collection of tales. It's not like a book of like European fairy tales. It's more like a spider's web of stories, and it's not just like a nice spider's web that you might see between two trees on an autumn day where it's all like nicely spread out. It's more like a kind of like a cobweb that's tucked up in the corner of the house on top of the wardrobe, and there's a load of dust and there's just spider's web tendrils everywhere, and it's really confusing, and parts of it are broken. And there are constant references to characters that you kind of need to know who they are and what they do and what their attributes are, and you know what they represent, as well as just their simple role in the story. So in order to help me with that aspect, I have been making incredibly slow progress. Like I've read maybe 2 or 3 pages, because every time a name comes up that I don't know who they are or what they do, and even names that I do know because I want to know a little bit more about them, I have been cross-referencing it in Brewer's book of Myth and Legend, which is this covers a lot of different myths and legends, so most of the ancient Greek stuff gets a very short paragraph, and it also kind of talks about how the ancient Greek stuff has been used in the future as well, so that kind of helps. And also the hefty Dictionary of Classical Mythology by Pierre Grimal, which apparently is the kind of bedrock of understanding old classical references. And yeah, it's good, it's really helpful, and I found out some entertaining things from it, such as the fact that the original lyre was created by Hermes out of a tortoise shell and the guts of a sacrificed cow when he was a baby. So yeah, talented god there, Hermes. Yeah, so I think that's really enriching my experience of reading the Odyssey, because it means that I'm going to hopefully understand it better, and hopefully be left with a much better understanding of sort of classical myths. But it does mean that it's probably going to take me at least a year to read it, and I'm worried that at some point I'm going to lose steam and sort of drop out, which is what happened with the Iliad. But I'm hoping, people have told me that the story is better in the Odyssey, and I mean that's another concept that was mentioned in the 50 ideas, like the difference between story and narrative and what is told and how it's told. We've already shown that how it's told is very good, but what is being told, I've been told, is what is being told, I've been told. But yeah, I've heard that the story has got kind of maybe more momentum and more plot and less battle scene. So hopefully that's going to be interesting and enjoyable. And the final book that I have been reading, thanks to Springathon, which I did not write down the host names for, is The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. Wohlleben? So this is a beautiful illustrated edition that was a present that my parents got for Beau. You can literally open any page at random and see some beautiful pictures of trees. It's actually an abridged version of the original text because they just wanted to make room for all of these beautiful pictures. But I think that's kind of like worthwhile, and I think the essence remains. What I would say is, I know Beau, when he read this, he did a lot of kind of secondary research and tried to find out how much of this is actually true. And certainly there are things which the author has maybe extrapolated from the truth or kind of expanded on slightly. He definitely very heavily personifies trees and tries to take like a kernel of scientific knowledge and turn it into like conclusive proof that trees have brains and things like that. I'm not saying that trees do not have some of the electrical signaling that we would associate with like nerve conduction, but definitely there he kind of takes things to the end of the line before maybe sorry, that was my breakfast spoon, before maybe the science has caught up with it. Just checking the time. As you can see, my place in this is marked by a rather gorgeously ridiculous pom-pom bookmark, which is something that I did as well while I was off. The pom-pom bookmark making kit came in a well-being kit that I was given at work, and I think it's strangely quite cute. And it only took me about maybe 5 or 10 minutes to make, so if you would like to find out how to make a pom-pom bookmark, I think if I did it again, I'd make the pom-poms a little bit fluffier, they're a little bit bitty, and let me know, and maybe we can do like a little bit of bookish craft together. Yeah, so that's going to be for Springathon, and I haven't really decided what else I'm going to read for it, or what prompts everything fits, and so on, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Yeah, and I think that's where I'm going to wrap up. I hope you all have a lovely day and that you're enjoying all of your reading at the moment and that you're taking care of yourself and staying healthy. I would love to hear from you all in the comments down below as usual, and yeah, I probably won't write a description right away, but if you come back tomorrow, I'll hopefully have written a description, and I'll try and link the article I mentioned at the start. Bye, take care.